Hello, everyone. This is Eamon Coyle with Relativity, and we're about to get started with the Office 365 Collections Made Easy in RelativityOne webinar. That is me on the right with the very large head. I'm Eamon. I'm a Senior Solutions Specialist, and I'm joined today by Gregory Evans, our Product Manager. So do you want to say?
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is Greg Evans. I'm the Product Manager for Legal Hold and Collect here at Relativity, and thank you for joining us today.
I'm going to go ahead and share the agenda with you. So we're going to give you an overview of Relativity Collect. We're going to show you how to set up Relativity Collect on the client side and then also on the provider side. We'll be setting up a project and then providing a demo, both for setting up on the client side in Microsoft and then also creating a project in RelativityOne. We will have time at the end for Q&A, and I would just, we're not going to answer questions throughout the webinar. We are going to wait till the end to answer all of your questions. So if you do have questions, a lot of the questions you may ask or that you may have will be answered, as we go through the webinar. So if we don't answer all your questions, just go ahead and put them at the end if you don't see that we've answered your question. And then Greg and I will go through and we'll answer questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Greg, and Greg is going to give us an overview of Relativity Collect.
All right, thank you, Eamon. All right, so what is Relativity Collect? Relativity Collect is a new application built on top of the Relativity platform. It is a part of Relativity. And the purpose of Relativity Collect is to give you a way to collect data from cloud sources. And initially, this first release, we're focused on Office 365. And specifically within Office 365, we have support for collecting Outlook mailboxes, calendars and contacts, as well as OneDrive files. Why might you want to use Relativity Collect? Well, as you may be aware, the adoption of Office 365 has really been growing exponentially over the past year or two. And now the number of commercial users as well as individual users has climbed extremely high, 34 million individual users of Office 365. So if you do collections regularly or for a living, you probably run into collections that need to be done in Office 365. And we want Relativity Collect to be that tool that you use for those collections. Other reasons why you'd want to use Relativity Collect, one of the biggest is that when you're doing your collections, the collection remains in the cloud. We're moving data from Office 365 directly into RelativityOne. So your data the entire time during collection, into processing, review, all remains in RelativityOne in one location. There's no need to pull collections down locally for processing. You're not pushing data back up into the cloud. You're really eliminating any of those steps that previously you may have had to do in order to get data to the point that it's actually ready for review. The part of what we did, one of the goals that we had for Relativity Collect was to give folks a very easy tool to use. The wizard interface that we provide, walks the user through the collection process step by step. You'll see that today as part of our demo. So once you've gotten familiar with the tool and with the wizard, you'll find that regardless of what data source you're collecting from, the experience will remain the same. It's always going to be the same set of steps that you'll follow to configure your application and then kick it off. So that eliminates or reduces the amount of tools that you may have to be familiar with and master. Once you've learned Relativity Collect, at that point you can the same knowledge can be used for any type of collection that you're working on. Additionally, there are integrations as well. So one of the nice features of Relativity Collect is that you can from within Collect, automatically have processing sets created of the collected data. So that way, in processing, your set's ready to go, and you can immediately begin processing and have that data ready for review more quickly. And another reason, many times, we need to defend our collection process. If anyone has questions about, how collections were conducted, what SOPs we may follow, when using Relativity Collect, again, you're going to be doing the same process over and over. It'll be, it's easy to demonstrate that, in a repeatable fashion, you're following the same steps for executing your collections. So being able to show consistency in how collections are undertaken is very important in defending your collection process. We kind of already talked about, maintaining on one platform. Again, by not having to move data around, we're reducing the chances for human error, that we may miss something, or worst case, we might alter data in some way, alter collected ESI. We do not want to do that. Also, part of Relativity Collect is we do generate a SHA-256 hash of every file collected. Basically, that's really like an electronic fingerprint of the file, and it can be used downstream. If you've provided copies of collections to other parties and folks want some guarantee that what they've received matches the original collection, these fingerprints allow us to do that. We can hash any other files, compare the values, and make sure that they match. And then lastly, we do provide very detailed item level reporting with the collections. So for every target that we collect from, a report is provided that shows each individual item that was collected, all of the associated metadata. And additionally, if we had any errors with individual items, you can download a secondary errors report, which will show you in detail the items that we had a problem with. All right. So between these two reports, you can demonstrate what exactly was collected and what may have been an issue that we didn't collect. All righty. So setting up Relativity Collect, first thing is how do I get it? Right. Before I can set it up, I need to get a copy of it. So with this first release in Goatsbeard 0, Collect is available to Central and soon East US Relativity customers. The collection wrap is not currently in the app library, so in order to obtain the wrap or have it added into your instance, you do need to make a formal request. So work with your CSM or call support, and we can get the wrap installed into your instance. With the next release of Goatsbeard in about a month, 10.3.1, you will find the collection wrap included in the application library. For all other geos, for folks not in Central or East US, same situation will apply with 10.3.1. You will see the Collect application in your application library, and you could download it and start working with it. The only thing you won't be able to do is actually start the collection. So a lot of the things you're going to see today in terms of admin setup, configuration of data sources, creating your custodial targets, you can do all those things. But until we get C4 deployed into that geo, you won't actually be able to start a collection. That being said, we do expect complete support for all RelativityOne customers with our Indigo release, our 11.0 release. And as I recall, I believe that's in January. So coming to you soon. All right. How exactly does Relativity Collect work? Well, you heard me mention C4 a moment ago. And really all you need to understand with that is C4 is a container architecture framework that we use to actually containerize and handle our collection jobs. The advantage of using containers for running jobs is that it adds a lot of stability and scalability to what we're doing. So if we have a particular job that fails or has an issue, C4 can automatically pick that job back up and continue working on it. As far as how we actually work with Office 365, as you'll see in the demo a little bit later, we work with an application registration that's made in Office 365. As part of that application process, Microsoft provides you with an application ID and an associated secret. And we use those to set up the data sources in Relativity Collect. So that information allows us to communicate through the Graph API with Office 365. And this is Microsoft's preferred way of having third-party applications communicate with Office 365. And again, as part of the demo, we'll show you exactly how to set this up and how to utilize that application ID and secret. Lastly, I want to point out the fact that Collect is a read-only application. There's nothing in Relativity Collect that will write or make any changes in Office 365. It is 100% completely read-only. And in fact, when we do that app registration and we start setting up the permissions that we're going to give to Relativity Collect, you'll see firsthand exactly which permissions we're enabling and the fact that they are all read-only. Alrighty, so I'm going to turn this back over to Eamon. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the different roles and responsibilities for folks that'll be working with Collect and Office 365.
All right, thanks, Greg. So the first role I want to talk about, and this is the role that you'll see Greg play later in the demo, is the O365 owner. And this is, if you have internally, you're going to use Collect for all of your internal collections. This would be somebody in your organization who manages your Office 365 system. And if you're going to be collecting data from your clients, it would be somebody with your client who manages Office 365 there. And basically what they're going to do is they're going to create an application registration for Collect with O365. What this will do is it'll generate an app ID and secret that are used to configure Collect. This is Microsoft's way of granting application access. And the important thing to remember and to know about it is that the application registration can be removed at any time. So internally, you may not want to remove it. If you are working with the client to collect data, say from their Office 365 Exchange environment or OneDrive, they may want to only grant you access for a short period of time. So they can create this application registration, and then once your collections are complete, they can delete the application registration or disable the application registration at a time of their choosing. And so they maintain control over their environment and access to that environment as well. The next role is as our Collect administrator. This is also a role that's played by an administrator, and basically what they do is they configure the target instance. They work with the O365 administrator in order to make sure that we receive the app ID. And then the Relativity Collect team also sets up the security group. They may also set up any of the custodian syncs with Relativity integration points. So if you are working with your client and you want to get a feed either from their HR system, you can set up a RIP job to do that for their Active Directory. Or if they don't have Active Directory, you can also use the FTP CSV process with RIP in order to load, to sync data from your client into your Collect workspace. You can also use the RDC, and so that process can be used as well. So we've talked about our administrators. Now we want to talk a little bit about the collection team. And we touched on this very briefly in a previous slide. And this is the collection team. From my experience of working in litigation support and being an e-discovery specialist, what I'm excited about with the Relativity Collect tool is I can take my skills and experience in using relativity to be able to move that like further to the left on the EDRM to be able to now go in and be able to also do collections as well. You'll see from the interface that it is relativity. It looks like relativity. It acts like relativity. And so being able to go in and understand what a collection does is really easy. When I've had to do collections in the past, I had to learn specialized software, learn the specialized way that criteria is created, and to be able to do that. And so I'm really excited about having a collection team that uses relativity. And your team, what they'll do is they'll create projects, they'll assign custodians, they can start and monitor the collections from beginning to end. They'll QC any errors, they'll do confirmations on the reports. And then once they're finished with that collection, just by pressing a button, they can send the collection job into a processing set, go into that processing set and start processing right away. And so it really does provide a very smooth experience for anyone who is using Relativity Collect to be able to pull pull data from their client, get it into your instance of RelativityOne, and start processing that data right away. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, and Greg is going to talk a little bit more about data sources and things like that.
All righty. So the next set of slides, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because you are going to see this in action as part of the demo. But we did want to make sure we covered this, had it, in the presentation. So if you go back to it in the future, you can refer to the presentation. So what kind of things do we need to do to actually configure Relativity Collect to be able to use it? So if you've used other applications in Relativity, like processing, case dynamics, legal hold, you're probably familiar with going through the process of adding your custodians or your entities into the workspace. So that's definitely one of the first things that we have to do. And it's not necessarily specifically a collect thing, right? Bringing in your custodians and entities is really something that's almost more at the workspace level. But we definitely we do need to have the custodians added into the workspace so that they're available for selection to collect from them. Once we've done that, then we need to set up our data sources, all right? And like I mentioned earlier, we have a few pieces of information that we need from Microsoft to successfully set up those data sources. So we've created our entities, our custodians, or synced them into the workspace. We've set up our data sources that we want to collect from with the information we got from Microsoft. The last thing we need to do then is, in essence, join those two together. And we do that via this concept of the custodian target. And really what a custodian target is if you think about a given custodian and a given data source, what is that identifying piece of information that allows us to actually collect their data assets? So a fine example would be, we've got this custodian, Alex Martin, and we're interested in his Outlook email. So the piece of identifying information that tells us exactly what to go after would be his email address. And as you can see here in this example, we've got Alexander Martin 2 at our testing tenant. So this will be the specific mailbox that we're going to collect for Alex for that 0365 tenant. Now, a custodian can have multiple targets. There's no reason, why someone can't have multiple email addresses. It's rare, but it happens. So you can really create as many targets as necessary for your custodians. Lastly, targets, you can enter them manually, or you can do them more automated by like using RIP or RDC to pull them in. But really what we're talking about is simply that intersection between the custodian and a particular data source, what that identifying information is that we need to use to actually get them rolling. I'm going to hand it back over to Eamon. He's going to talk a little bit about how we actually set up collection projects to be begin our collections.
All right, so this is the next set of slides I'm going to take you through briefly because we are going to go through these more in depth in relativity. And let me go ahead and press next. And then let's get started. So the first thing you'll see is we are using a wizard to help you set up collections. And I'm a big fan of wizards. I think they just make things easier and simpler to do. And so the first thing we would do is we would just set up our new collection. And this is where we would put in our collection details and select the data source. Our next step in the wizard is to then, for our data sources, assign the custodians that we are going to collect from. For that particular data source. So you can collect from a data source and you can collect multiple custodians at the same time if you choose to. We're going to configure that data source, and this is where we're going to enter the criteria that we are going to use to collect data either from their OneDrive, their Outlook mailbox, contacts, and calendar. And we'll go through some of these different options today, but our documentation really does provide a lot of detail. And then finally, we're going to kick off our project. We're going to go ahead and start that collection, and then we'll go ahead and we'll monitor from there. And so we're going to go ahead and start our demo, and Greg is going to show you how to get set up in Microsoft. And all right, so I got the right screen.
All right, thanks, Eamon. All righty, so the first part of this demo, I'm going to walk you through what you need to do in Office 365 to set up that application registration. So first thing, you're going to want to go to portal.azure.com, like you can see here. Once you're logged into that, you're going to come over here and under All Services, you're going to go ahead, click All Services. And then really the fastest way to get to the app registration page is just do a search for app registration, and it'll be the top option that comes up. So you want to go ahead and select that. And we want to do a new registration. So we'll click on new registration. And then we want to give it a name. We want to give the registration a name, something that other people will recognize when they see it. This will help ensure that someone doesn't accidentally delete a registration that we may have. I'm going to call this one we'll call this the Collect Webinar App Registration. Down here, we're going to go with the default, which is single tenant. In general, we do want to maintain a one-to-one relationship between the app registration and the tenant. This is somewhat for security concerns. If you're dealing with multiple clients, we want to ensure that each client has their own registration that works just with their specific Office 365 tenant. So we're going to keep that default at single tenant. We're down at the bottom of the page. We're going to go ahead and hit register. And that's going to now take us to our app registration page for this particular application. First thing we're going to want to do, this application ID that Microsoft generated, we want to go ahead and copy that because we're going to need that a little bit later when we go back over to Relativity. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to my notepad here so that I've got it. And next step, we're going to come down and we're actually going to set the permissions for this application. What can this application do in Office 365? So we're going to go ahead, click on the View API Permissions. We're then going to go ahead and add a permission. We want to select Microsoft Graph. That we work through the Microsoft Graph API. As I mentioned earlier, this is the preferred way to communicate with Office 365. So it should be the default at the top here. We want to go ahead and select that. Then we want to do application permissions. We are registering an application and we are assigning permissions to an application, so we want to select this option. All right. We're now presented with a long list of permissions, and we're going to now go through and select each individual permission. First one we want to do is we want to come down here to calendars, open that up, and we want to check off calendars read. So this is going to give our application read access for calendars. Then we're going to go down a little bit further. We now want to select contacts. Similar to what we did with calendars, we want to select that option to read. 2 down, 4 to go. We're going to scroll down a little bit further till we get to files. This is going to be for our OneDrive collections. We want to go ahead and check the files read all. So this is going to give our collect application the ability to read files from OneDrive. And we continue on down till we get to mail. And here we want to check the mail.read permission. And of course, as it says here, this is going to give us the ability to read mail in custodial mailboxes. And note, as we're going through here, every permission we're selecting are read-only permissions. All right, next we're going to go down a little bit further till we get to sites. I'm going to open that up. Scroll down a little bit more, and we want to check the sites read all. Again, this is going to give us an ability to be able to collect OneDrive files from our custodians. And then lastly, at the very bottom under user, we're going to go ahead and select user read all. So this is going to give the collection application the ability to actually read information about custodians. All right, once we've got all of our necessary permissions checked, we're going to go ahead and hit the add permissions button to add them to our application registration. Once you've done that, you should see a list that looks just like this with 7 permissions. You can see currently that they say they are not granted. So until we actually have an admin grant these to the application, the collection application still won't be able to do the necessary work that it is required to do. We grant those permissions down here at the bottom with the grant admin consent for relativity button. If you do not yourself have permissions or privileges in Office 365 to actually be able to grant these permissions, you will need to find that Office 365 administrator in your organization that can do this for you. But this is a necessary step. We want to click that button. And yes, we do want to give consent. And if all goes well, we should see green check boxes all the way down. So we are now done with our setup here, almost done with our setup here in Office 365. So we've got the permission set. The last thing we need to do is we actually need to create a secret for this application registration. So we do that by selecting this option here, certificates and secrets. Then we're going to come over here and add a new client secret. I'm going to set mine to never. You can set to 1 or 2 years. These are Microsoft options. I'm just going to give my description here of this secret. We're going to call it the Collect Webinar App Secret. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the add button. All right, now here's the really, really important step. Down here, we've created our secret. This is the secret right here shown under value. We want to copy that to our clipboard, and we want to save that for when we set up our data sources in Relativity. And it's important that we save that off because this is the only time that Microsoft is actually going to show you this secret value. Once we leave this screen, there's no way to get this value again. If you forget it or lose it, you're basically kind of out of luck. At least with this registration, you would need to go through the registration process again to create a new application registration and then get that app ID and secret and use those for your setup in Relativity. All right, so at this point, we've got our 3 vital pieces of information. We know our domain, we've got our app ID, our password that we just got from creating this application registration. We can now go over into Relativity Collect and actually use this information to set up our data sources. All right, so here we are in Relativity Collect. Where we go to actually set up the data sources in Collect is here under Collection Admin. So I'm going to jump in there. Now, we've already created data sources for purposes of this demo, so I'm not going to make you guys watch me do this for each data source, but I'm going to go through it once just so you can see how you utilize that information that we got from Office 365. So we click on the new data source button. And we're going to give this a name. So we'll call this the Collect webinar. And for this particular data source, I'm going to set up for OneDrive. So I'm going to give it a name that tells folks what this data source is so they'll recognize it in the future. And I'm going to go ahead and associate it with OneDrive. You can see the data sources we currently support. Slack will be coming very soon. Currently, though, we like I mentioned earlier, OneDrive, Outlook calendars, Outlook contacts, as well as mailboxes. All right, so we now have to enter our 3 pieces of information. So first is that domain value. So I went ahead and entered that. Then we need the application ID. Make sure I get it exactly right. And then lastly, we need this secret. Now, what I'm doing for OneDrive here, you would do exactly the same thing for the other Office 365 data sources. All of them set up exactly the same way. You enter the domain, app ID, and secret, and you'll be all set. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And then we'll go back to our list. And I will mention that secret that we entered that we got from Microsoft, that secret is stored in Relativity's secret store. So very similar to what you saw over in Office 365. Once you've entered that secret into Relativity as part of your data source setup, we never show that value again anywhere. We don't include it in any logging, anything like that, and it's secured in our secret store at all times. Again, if you lose that secret and you can't find it, you can always go back, create a brand new application registration, and then reset that data into your data sources. Alrighty, so that's setting up a data source. Lastly, we'll take a look at setting up custodian targets. So as I mentioned earlier, our target is nothing more than that intersection between a particular data source and a particular custodian. I'm going to create one manually so you guys can see what that looks like. We click the new custodian target button, and I'm going to give this, we'll go ahead and use that. The entity, right? So mentioned earlier, these are the folks we've entered into our workspace. I'm going to go ahead and select myself. So we've got our entity, then the data source we want to use. So here's the data source I just created. So I'm selecting that data source. And then lastly, what's the target that I want to use? In this particular case, this happens to be my email address for our testing tenant, and it also happens to be the piece of information that's used to actually identify my OneDrive account. So now at this point, when I'm building a collection, if I pick this particular data source, and I pick this particular entity as part of my setup for my new collection job, when the time comes to actually do the collection, this is what we're going to go after. This is what Relativity Collect is going to go out and grab. All right, we'll go ahead and save that off. So that basically completes the admin setup for both Office 365 and for what you need to do in Relativity Collect. So I am going to turn it back over to Eamon, and he's going to actually show you now how to use that information to build a collection, start it, and then monitor the collection.
All right, thanks, Greg. So I'm going to go through and take you through creating a collection job, and then we'll monitor it and then look at the results of that collection. So it's a very simple process. I'm gonna click on New Collection, and then I'm gonna enter the name of my collection. So I'm just gonna call it the Ask the Expert Alex Martin collection. And of course you can name this whatever you want. You may want to have your own naming convention. I'm going to choose a collection matter. So it's important for me to note that this collection matter is related to the collection itself. This is not your client and matter information. So your matter information when you're creating a workspace. And so if you are going to create a collection workspace, say like a repository workspace where you're going to put one client into that particular workspace, they may have different matters, but these matters don't sync up to the matters when you're creating like a brand new workspace for them. So there's no synchronization here. You have to create this one by one. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. I can then select my processing source location. This is the location where the data is going to be saved to. So I know that I need to collect data, and then I know that the data that I want to collect for this particular job, I'm going to process for review. I'm going to give it a name, and we'll just call it ATE001, and then a description, Alex Martin's data. Whatever you would like to put in there. So I've put together my collection details, and I'm going to choose to collect from all four, starting out with. Once I have all of this information entered, I can do one of two things. I can come all the way up here and click on Next. I could also have just selected the Two Custodians button. I've decided, at the beginning of this that I'm only going to collect from one custodian. You can choose to collect from multiple custodians, and these are all entered on your entities object. So you could have access to as many employees as you want. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Alex Martin. I'm going to go ahead and now configure those four data sources. I'm going to start with my Outlook mailbox, actually, is the first thing I want to set up. Oh, wait, I got to choose OneDrive first. Okay. All right, so I got to choose OneDrive. I'm going to choose where my data source is and select that. I have a variety of different selections I can make to collect. So I can choose file extension, creation date, modification date, all of these different types of things that I can collect, that I can choose the criteria for. This again is covered in our documentation. I'm going to leave this field blank, but before I go on, I do want to just make something clear. The creation date is the date the data is stored to Microsoft OneDrive. So this is a OneDrive, we can call it OneDrive metadata, and it's not file metadata. It's not the date the file was created that is stored within the file. So it's important to know that if you're going to choose that as a criteria. I'm not going to choose anything. And so what that basically means is what's going to happen is everything in Alex Martin's OneDrive and his share drive is going to be collected as part of this collection. Next, I'm going to jump down to my Outlook mailbox. That has automatically been saved. I didn't need to do anything with that, and I'm going to go ahead. And I want to collect all of Alex Martin's email from, let's say,
You're on the calendar.
Oh, I'm on calendar.
Yeah,
Never
you
mind.
got to do those in order.
Oh, wait. How did I get on? Oh, sorry, I'm on calendar.
Yeah, it's going to force you to go through
this
first before you get to the email.
Okay, so the start date, I'm going to collect everything here on start date. We'll just say 9/1/2019. And then I'm going to add, whoops, didn't like my date. So I'm going to go back to September, set that right. I'm going to click on add criteria. So the criteria comes here, and I'm going to change this to end date, and I will put that as October 1st, 2019. So this will, see, I have that right. Okay, so this will collect any calendar appointment between September and October. All right, so I have that. Let's see if I select here. Oh, I got to choose a source. This went so well in rehearsal.
And then you go to, it's going to put you in contacts.
Oh, and then I'm going to go to contacts. And basically with contacts, I collect everything for contacts in that. And then finally down to my Outlook mailbox. And here I'm going to collect everything after a certain date. So I want to collect all of the email for Alex Martin that came in from the last year. So I'm going to change this to 2018, and we'll do everything that is greater than or equal to October 1st, 2018. I do want to make a note of this checkbox, this collect all emails with attachments regardless of criteria. In this collection, I'm collecting every email that has a sent date after October 1st, 2018, whether it has an attachment or it doesn't have an attachment. If I were to do keyword searching, the keyword searching that Microsoft allows is just for the email body or the email metadata. So if you are going to run any search terms or anything like that, you do want to, the tool is not going to search attachments. And that's a setting that's set up by Microsoft. So if you do a keyword search, you do want to set this in order to get any email that might have an attachment. Since I'm doing it by date, I don't need to do that for this particular one. I do need to select a particular source. I'm going to go ahead and add that criteria, and I'm finished with all of my criteria. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my collection summary. This is where I'll do my QC. So we'll let all the details kind of generate here. The targets are generating, as we can see here. And then all of my QC stuff comes up. So I have one custodian and I have 4 data sources. I have 4 targets. I have entered 2 sources without criteria. So that's the contacts and the OneDrive. And now I have finished my collection job, and I'm going to save and close. So my progress is going to be saved. All right, so there are a couple of things you can do now. You can verify connections. This is a good idea to do, especially if you're working with a client and you're taking client from their system, just to make sure everything is set up on their end and that they haven't closed anything off to you. Generate targets, we already did that. You saw that in the process we went to when we saved the job. So really what I want to do right now is I want to just start my collection. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start Collection and then confirm that I want the collection to start. So the collection is going to go ahead and start. And so we have a job that's already in progress. So we'll close this out for now and then come back to it. Let's see. Great. Well, so we'll close. And so we'll go over to the monitor and we'll see what's going on with that job. So everything we've done has been saved. And so it looks like the whatever was running has completed running. So I'm going to try and just run my job again. And we'll let it run through the process. And then if this doesn't go, we'll just choose, excellent. So there we go. All right, so now it's going. We'll run over here. We'll check on monitor, and what we'll see is we'll see all of the jobs that have been collected, everything that we've collected before. And now all of our jobs are going to go through and start collecting. So you can see the status here. While that's going through and doing that, so we already see that we've already collected from Alex's email box, his contacts, not very many contacts, and then his calendar events. So we'll let it go ahead and collect from the OneDrive. And while we do that, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, and Greg is going to take us through some of these tabs up here, and then just talk a little bit about those tabs.
Sure. Thanks, Eamon. Okay, so the page that we're actually on right now, the monitor page, the intent of this page is to show you, in real time what's going on with your collection. So this page is going to show you any actively running collection, as well as any collections that have completed within the past 24 hours. So really the intent here is to show you what's actually happening in real time and what collections you may have started recently have finished. If we want to go look at collections that completed more than 24 hours ago, or if perhaps someone's given us an inquiry about a particular custodian or a particular collection job, we've got some other areas that we can go to kind of look up status for collections, what may have transpired for a given collection. So we'll go ahead and take a look at those pages while we let our OneDrive collection here continue. First page I want to show you is our target status page. Now the purpose of this page is to show at the target level the outcome for each target collection. And this is for all collections that have ever been performed in the workspace, at least based on whatever filter criteria you have on this page. I like this page because, again, when I used to do collections, many times I would get those phone calls where, Greg's our key custodian, has his collection completed yet? When do we think it will be completed? How much data did we get? How many items did we collect? How large was the collection? So I can come to this page and very quickly home in on a particular custodian. If my custodian was involved in more than one type of collection, I, of course, then filter by a specific collection job. So I can very quickly see for a given individual, what have we done to date? What kind of collections have we performed for this particular custodian? So again, the idea kind of being we want to take a look at that target level. Over here for at a higher view is our status summary. This is showing us at the job level all the collections that we've done. And again, I can come in and filter by certain things. I can see how many items overall did we collect for the job, how big was the entire job, did we have any errors, were there any targets that we couldn't collect for whatever reason, how many targets were successfully completed. If I've got collections that either have yet to run or that are in progress, I may have open targets still. So this page the intent is to kind of come in and be able to get a high level view to look at all my collection jobs that are out there. It could be I come in Monday morning and I know I've had collections that have been running over the weekend. I may just want to quickly check and see, did we have any errors that I want to dig into, potentially retry or whatnot. So these two pages are really useful in terms of kind of getting, whatever level of information you need, getting a view of what happened with your collections. So I'm going to jump back over and see where we're at with our OneDrive collection. All right, so it looks like we've probably got another few minutes to go before this collection is going to wrap up. I'm going to turn it back over to Eamon. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the reporting that we get out of Collect for our collections, and that should still leave us some time for some questions.
Yep. All right, thanks, Greg. So I'm going to go and take a look at one of our previous collections that we did, and we'll go and take a look at that. So this is a collection that we ran yesterday. And here is some of the information about it. So if I wanted to, I can get results for a particular, actually, this is the one from today.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm looking at this one. This is the one from today. I can take a look at the results for Alex Martin on his his Outlook mailboxes. So that will download to a CSV. And once I open the CSV, I can see more details about what was actually collected for Alex. So let's go ahead and open this file and take a look. So here you'll see we have some information, we have path, we have file name. So this is just some very basic information, some details that we have on this particular collection of Outlook. We could also, so I could go through and download each one of these if I wanted to. But instead of doing that, what I could do is once the collection completes, this collection details will become available to me, and it will just put all of the results and everything into a zip file. So let's go take a look at that. Let me just go back one. And so I could just click on this. This is just going to generate a zip file that will have all of the details that are listed here. The next report is the collection summary. So this is just a report of everything that we've collected. This can be shared with your case team, whatever kind of information that you would want. It provides the number of items collected and then also the size of that collection, as well as some information about the job itself and when the report was generated. So we provide you with some information about the collection as well. Right now, everything that I wanted to collect has been collected for this particular job. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a processing job. So this particular button will go ahead and it will create a processing job. We'll let this run through very quickly. What this will do is it will create a new processing set. It will connect to these to the collected data that is sitting in our processing source location. And I can have you take a look at that. Actually,
yeah, you closed it.
I closed it. Sorry, I closed the window that allows you to view it. So I wanted to show that. But this is the one that we just created. And that would take you directly into the processing set. And you can, from here, if you have more than one processing profile, you can change the profile, whatever you would want to do with the processing. You can just go ahead and click directly on Discover Files and get your processing set started. So I'm going to go back over to Collect, and that is really our presentation today. We'll go through and we'll take a look at some questions and answer some questions. Either Greg will answer or I will answer. All right, so will Collect be made available in on-prem Relativity?
At this time, Collect is only being offered to RelativityOne customers. And at this time, there is no intent to make it available for on-prem.
You mentioned the custodian tab when you went through the wizard setup step. Is the custodian or entity tab what you're actually working with? So we're actually working with the entity tab. The entity tab was introduced in 10.0, and the custodian tab was renamed to entity. We still call, for the purposes of legal hold and for collect and preservation, we still call the individuals on the entity tab custodians. So that may be a little different. Is the criteria filter leveraging O365, or is Relativity filtering the data? More specifically, is the keyword searching using Microsoft syntax and capabilities?
Excellent question. Yes, actually this is, we're doing Relativity Collect is doing the filtering. We are not using Microsoft syntax and capabilities. So for this first version of the filter criteria feature, it is admittedly a little bit basic. We don't support things like wildcard characters and all that. We made the decision to kind of include the basic filter criteria that are used most frequently Many times date range is used to filter data down, to call that initial collection down, and then subsequently, in your processing software, with like relativity processing, then you do have all those keyword search capabilities that you would want, like wildcards and proximity keyword searching and things like that. In subsequent releases of Relativity Collect, we will be expanding the functionality of the criteria builder for Collect, but currently, yes, it's using, we're doing our own filtering, not utilizing Microsoft's capabilities.
Right. Does Collect access the recoverable items folder for mailboxes or legal hold?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it does. So if you've got preservation holds in place or litigation holds, regardless if you've created them from within Relativity Legal Hold, or if you've created them from within Microsoft Security and Compliance Center, if your particular custodian or the custodian we're collecting, if they happen to have any data that is under preservation hold, so whether it's recoverable items folder or the preservation hold library, Relativity Collect is going to automatically pull all of that data as part of that collection for that custodian. There's no option that you have to select or anything like that. It just happens automatically.
Why is mail, contacts, and calendar separated as different sources?
Well, we made the decision to break those into separate data sources. Some folks don't necessarily want to collect, calendar items and contact lists every single time they do a collection. So we opted to make those, basically optional. So you can determine if you do or do not want to collect those additional Outlook types of information.
And can you collect from PC sources?
So currently, no. The first release of Relativity Collect here does not support any kind of collections for endpoints. But I can say that currently we are in the process of working on an integration with X1. X1 has endpoint collection technology, and we are working on giving our users the ability to actually collect using X1 from right within Relativity Collect. So when that integration is complete, what you'll see would be another data source tile. If you recall back when we set up our collection, we could pick which data source types we were interested in collecting. In the future, you will see many more tiles come out along that bottom of that first step in the wizard, and X1 will be an option that folks will have if they need to do endpoint collections.
Okay. Do you know when it'll be available for EU?
So Relativity Collect, I can say it will definitely be ready when Indigo comes out. For certain. We actually may have EU up and running before that. If you want, you can contact your CSM and discuss with them where things are at, but definitely by Indigo it will be there. We may get it out a little bit sooner.
And does it matter the license for the Microsoft Security Center, the E3 or E5 license?
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter what license you've got in Office 365. Collect is going to work with either one of those.
And then what needs to be done if you want to collect only mailbox and not OneDrive, calendars, or contacts, then you just don't set those up, right?
Right. Yeah. If the intent for a particular job was that we only want to collect email, we're never going to want to collect any of the other sources, then you would just go ahead and just set up an email data source and stop there. And then that will be, when you get to that third step in the wizard, and it shows you what data source instances you have available, you would just see, that particular data source that you set up.
And we just have a couple more questions, and we're going to go over a little bit on time, or we have gone over a little bit on time, but we're going to go ahead and just finish up these last couple of questions. One, there has been a question about when will it be available for on-prem clients, or when it will be available outside of RelativityOne. So we have answered that question, that currently right now there is not a plan to put it on-prem. And then the next question, can you create a processing set with multiple collections? So it sounds like you want Ralph, you wanted to do multiple collections into multiple processing sets, is how I'm interpreting that. So,
yeah. So for this first release, when you press that button to create the processing job that Eamon showed you, what's going to happen is all of the targets for that collection job, they are going to go together into one processing set. We do have plans on the roadmap to offer more flexibility in how a particular processing set is built. So another example might be if you actually wanted to create a separate processing set for each custodian. In the future, we'll give you the option to do things like that, where you can just have each custodian their own processing set for whatever purposes you have, maybe depending on what your dedupe plan is going to be for that particular matter or whatnot.
Okay, and I think that looks like all the questions we have. So if you wanted to, I'm going to ask Greg one question, and if you so if you wanted to sign off right now, that's cool. If you want to listen, that's cool. So Greg, you used to do collections when you were starting to design this particular tool. What were some of the most important things that you wanted to make sure got in the tool so that would really help end users like you or people who wanted to learn how to do collections?
Yeah, I think probably the number one thing that we considered and thought about in great depth and detail when we started to design Relativity Collect is we wanted to try and make it as easy to use as possible. A lot of that complexity of building collections correctly and making sure everything's configured properly and your connections are all right. We wanted to remove all that and really let our users be able to just focus on, building that collection with the key information that they need and not make it any more complex than that. So that was really our number one goal, was to try and make this a very easy tool to use, and one that once you know it, once you've learned it, you're pretty much good to go. Like from data source to data source type, the only thing that really changed might be the types of filter criteria that you could apply. But in terms of setting up the collection, it's going to be the same regardless of what type of data sources we're talking about.
Okay, great. We want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We know how busy you are with your time, and so for you to be able to spend this time with us, we really appreciate it. And if we didn't get, we'll review the questions, and if we didn't get an answer to you, we'll make sure we get back to you outside via email. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great day or evening wherever you are.